All right, this is Obeid on behalf of Electronics, and in this video, we'll add to our understanding of neoclassical economics. Okay, now when it comes to neoclassical economics, we did talk about full potential. We talked about the Keynesian as well as the neoclassical zone. Now, in this video, we'll talk about how the neoclassical economics impacts recession or inflation, as well as government intervention. Okay. Now we know that when it comes to a recession or inflation, okay, the government as well as the central bank has the authority to impose certain types of policies. Okay. And these are your fiscal. So you have fiscal and monetary policies. Okay. And your fiscal policies have to do with tax cuts and tax addition. Your monetary policies have to do with interest rates and bonds. When it comes to Keynesian economics, we know Keynesian economics has to do with getting a country out of recession. Okay, so getting out of recession, getting out of recession. And the reason why it has to do with getting out of recession is because in Keynesian economics, okay, what we're trying to do is move the aggregate demand curve either to the left or to the right. Okay, so suppose this is your price level and this is your real GDP. Okay, when it comes to Keynesian economics, we're trying to move your aggregate demand either to the left or to the right. So to the right or to the left. Okay, so in most cases, the government intervention as well as the government policies will focus on moving the demand curve. This is your aggregate demand curve towards the right. And the reason for this is to improve your real GDP. Okay, because we know that as the curve moves to the right, the price level will stay the same. Okay, because of the flat curve. Okay, however, the real GDP may change. Okay, and because the real GDP changes and it's moving towards full potential over here, which is your long range average supply curve. Okay, your unemployment rate goes down and you have something called economic expansion, which is good for the economy. It creates jobs, okay, it creates better living conditions, okay, so on and so forth. So Keynesian economics is based on your aggregate demand shifting to the right and the economy getting out of recession. All right. Now, on the other side, your neoclassical perspective or neoclassical economics has to do with moving the demand curve either up or down. Okay. Now, when the demand curve moves up or down, okay, what's going to happen is the price level change. Okay. The price level changes. And because the price level changes and the output doesn't really change because it's at full potential, okay, we're talking about changes in prices and wages. All right. And for that reason, okay, your neoclassical perspective, okay, and this is for long-term growth. Okay, so this is your long-run macroeconomics, long-run macroeconomics. Okay, focuses on getting the country out of inflation rather than recession. Okay, so Keynesian economics is not too concerned about recession because we know that when it comes to your Keynesian zone, your GDP stays the same, the output stays the same. So we're not really talking about expansion over here, economic expansion by changing your output, production, or real GDP, but we're concerned about the price levels. Okay, because if the price levels of goods fall, we have inflation, okay, where the prices, okay, basically mean that the goods are devalued, the currency is devalued, okay, and as a result of which, okay, you may have a situation that we've talked about this situation in the past where you would need a wagon full of money just to buy a loaf of bread. Okay, so the neoclassical economics, okay, focuses on inflation rather than recession, unlike Keynesian economics. And this has to do with the change in price levels. This has to do with the movement of aggregate demand curve up and down, as a result of which you either have inflation or deflation. Okay, so when you have inflation, okay, the purchasing power goes down. Okay, you have purchasing power, which goes down. When you have deflation, the purchasing power goes up. Okay, purchasing power goes up. Now, we all agree that the economy needs some sort of inflation, okay, some level, some low level of inflation, okay. However, and this is to boost economic growth, okay, for expansion, for economic expansion, okay, to pump money into the system, for the governments to buy bonds, for the governments to circulate money within the system. You may need some sort of inflation, a low level of inflation to keep the economy out of recession, to keep the unemployment levels low. Okay, however, if there is too much inflation, okay, what's going to end up happening is the purchasing power will go down and currency will get devalued. So currency gets devalued. All right, and because this currency gets devalued, okay, eventually it will lead to a situation where, okay, you will have, okay, unemployment because your purchasing power goes down, consumption will go down, okay, currency gets devalued, and we know that personal consumption makes up a big chunk of GDP, which means that in the long term, this inflation will lead to a recession one more time, okay, despite these short-term benefits. All right, so neoclassical views or neoclassical perspective, okay, focuses on long run macroeconomics, and it has to do with getting the country out of inflation. Okay, and this may have to do with government policies as well. So, neoclassical view basically says that you should have government policies that should focus on getting the country out of inflation. If the tax cuts are too big, then the country may be able to get out of recession, but it may lead to an inflation, which will eventually lead to a stagflation or, okay, long-term recession. Okay, so that would be it for this video. On behalf of Electronics, this is Ubaid. Have yourself a great day.